So I'm going to show you guys the exact difference between old worn out stock motor mounts and brand new stiffer polyurethane upgraded motor mounts. We're going to learn together exactly how to install these things, and we'll once and for all be able to answer the question if upgrading the polyurethane bushings is worth it on a street driven car like this. This is my 1999 323IS E36 build. I'm pretty sure it has over 250,000 miles on it. But while most people would have thrown this car in the trash, send it off to the scrappers, I'm going to be saving it. And there's a ton of different things that we need to do. One of the main things that a lot of people miss out on when it comes to repairing or upgrading a car, especially something older like this, is their worn out motor mounts, bushings, pretty much anything rubber that just wears out over time. Gets brittle, gets cracked, gets stressed. But the thing is, a lot of this stuff is hard to actually notice, especially if it deteriorates over a long period of time. So let's rip the hood straight off of this car, slap a GoPro on the front of it, and see exactly how much movement we get throughout the engine when we're just driving around.
It's kind of hard to tell from the driver's seat, but honestly, I'm just having a blast driving around with no hood. But when I slow down the footage, I can clearly see the motor flopping around when I get off throttle. Now remember, I have no idea how this car is supposed to drive, so I'm super excited to experience these upgraded mounts.
For this particular car, or pretty much any 6-cylinder E36, we're going to use the Quinn Clark Menace technique, which very simply means that
we're going to unbolt the top nuts for both sides of the engine mounts, but we're not going to completely remove the passenger side first. Then we're going to go underneath and we're going to unbolt the bottom on the passenger side as well, and then we're going to focus on removing the driver's side. And basically what will happen is when we jack up the motor with the passenger side still attached, the motor will actually tilt slightly, which will increase the amount of space we have to remove the old mount and then insert the new one on the driver's side. Then we're going to loosely attach the nuts on the top and bottom of the driver's side and do the exact same thing on the passenger side.
Give me soup beyond soup.
Start by loosening the passenger side engine mount nut.
it's relatively easy to reach with an extension and a swivel mount or U-joint. Just like that. Now make sure you do not cross thread or strip this top bolt because you're coming at an angle. I've done that before on the Z and it was not fun. The passenger side nut loose, we're going to move on to the driver's side. And we basically need to thread the needle to the nut on top of the bracket right there. Now if there's one thing I can emphasize, it is do not strip that top nut on the top of your motor mount. If you do, a few hour job could turn into a 6-month-long job like it did for me on my 350Z. In this case, the approach was actually a little easier. I came from the front side. Using my hand, I placed a 16mm socket directly onto the nut. Then I went back and fished the extensions and made sure I put pressure and popped that into the socket itself.
Now we jack up the car. Now we're going to crack the bottom 17mm nuts loose on the passenger side, and we're going to remove it on the driver's side. Moving underneath the car, we have our lower passenger side motor mount nut. That should be a 17mm, and we may have to go through one of the holes in the control arm to get to it, but we're going to crack that loose, not completely, and then move to the driver's side. Alright, with that loosened, we're going to move on to the other side. Now we move to the front of the car and we're going to need our jack, some wood blocks, and the knowledge of where you want to put pressure on your engine and where you don't. Taking a look under here, we have our sway bar, we have our power steering rack, we have the subframe right there, and right here we have the front of the engine. All the way back there we also have the rear lower oil pan. We need to jack the motor up in order to create enough space to remove our mounts. So what we're going to do is use a wood block or a combination of wood blocks to distribute the load evenly on a portion of the underside of the engine that will be able to handle that force. So we can lift it up just enough to squeeze the old mount out and squeeze the new one in. In my case, my car is lowered on these absolutely terrible max speeding rod coilovers that leave literally zero droop travel, which is causing my sway bar to be in a really awkward position. But I believe I have enough space, enough leeway to safely put this block right here and get enough leverage to jack the engine up safely. So we'll do it slowly, and if we have any issues, then we'll just lower it back slowly. Naturally, things never go as expected, especially when you're working on modified cars. From what I can tell, because there is zero droop on these coilovers, this front control arm is not moving enough for me to get the motor mount out of its location. So I think what I'm going to have to do is actually just completely disconnect these as they're McPherson struts and just basically drop it on this tire. As you can see, I already started just by undoing these 13mm bolts, and hopefully that's all it'll take. That's out. We lost a bolt somewhere, which we'll find. And hopefully we got enough angle. I don't know if we did. Let's do a comparison. We finally got it out after a little bit of extra work because of our poor decision by one of the previous owners of my car. This is what an OEM mount looks like. It's fat, it's heavy, it takes up a ton of space. It's a mixture of rubber and metal, and as you can tell, it is seen better days. It looks like it's fluid filled, and that's ruptured and it's oozing. I mean, these were definitely still performing okay as the engine wasn't completely falling out, but they also definitely needed to be replaced based on that. Compared to the new mounts, these are definitely stiffer to the touch and are not deformed at all and are taller. So the engine is actually going to sit a little bit higher in the car than it currently is, which is actually what it should have stock. For comparison, let's measure how thick each of these mounts are. About 69mm tall, and that's pretty much all the way around as they're even. Whereas the old mounts, you can even visually see sunk down on one side. So it's going to be uneven to start with. And we get about 67.1 on the sunken side and 68.5 on the taller side, which is about a millimeter. So these are definitely deformed and not to the stock spec. Now, installation should just basically be the reverse process. We're going to slot that in. We need to ensure that this dowel pin right here slots into the appropriate place on the subframe, or else we won't have this offset nut in the proper place. So what we're going to do is we're going to slot it in. We're going to rotate it around until it sticks. And then we're going to basically snug up this bottom nut to ensure that while we're trying to get the top nut locked in place, we don't accidentally bump it out of place and then it's no longer centered by this dowel. I've been working on partnering up with a really cool coilover company to replace these max speeding rod craps, and it's just been taking longer than I expected. So it's just, keeping these for now, even with the missing stud here. After dropping the coil, this stud is now loose and will not go on. This is cross-threaded and destroyed. So I think I'm actually just going to go and order a new set of coilovers in the meantime, just to have everything together and not on this crappy stuff. And then I'll use that to compare to the company that I'm going to be working with. We swooped down to AutoZone and picked up some new hardware. I don't know if this is exactly what we'd want, but it's good enough for now. Let's put it this way. It's better than having nothing there. So let's drop this stuff in really quick. And then we'll install the top nut on our driver's side mount and move on to the passenger side. And that's a lot better. All right, driver's side on. We left the top nut loose so that there's still some play for the engine to rotate when we lift it to easily get the passenger side out. One thing I did notice is these specific new bushings, the dowel pin wasn't like slotting directly into the opening, so where I could still freely rotate it in a circle. It was catching on the place it's supposed to be. So I said, screw it, sent it, I aligned it to where it caught, and then when I lowered the motor and I go back and look underneath, it actually fit into the place. So I'm not sure if that's how it's supposed to work, or if it's supposed to just slot in without any pressure, but it worked for me. So let's see how it is on the passenger side. So we'll completely remove the top nut and go underneath and remove the bottom one, and then we'll jack the motor up. Yeah, look at this thing. Now, because it's on the exhaust side, there's also this heat shield that came off. with this locating pin right here, right there. All you need to do is, if your motor mount came with these cutouts on top, is just slot it into that and then point it towards your exhaust manifold. Don't forget to put this back on before you reinstall. Alright, we're having trouble getting enough height with that lifting point, so I've seen plenty of videos on YouTube of people using a wood block on the oil pan itself, so we're going to start swiping over there and see if that helps.
Well, I just had dinner, hit yet another setback, but this is what happens when you decide to work on your own car, guys. You can either give up, wrap it up and take it to a mechanic, or you can work through the same problems that they'd be working through anyways. In my case, I'm having a lot of trouble getting the engine high enough to actually fit the new taller passenger side engine mount into that gap. So, did some more research. There are a couple different ways you could approach it, removing some things and making it so you can actually lift this even higher, which I don't particularly want to do, or undoing 4 13mm bolts for the passenger engine mount, which should loosen it and give it enough free play for you to easily slide the top of the engine mount in. So, seeing as how that's the exact approach I used on the Z when I had issues on the passenger side, I'm going to try that route. So let's get this thing knocked out so this car can be put back on the road.
All right, now we can lower this back down and hopefully everything falls into the right place.
There's not a lot of room under there, but let's quickly knock out these transmission bushings. Super easy, 13mm bolts on the bottom, and then either it'll slide out or you might need a 13mm at the top. Support the middle of the transmission with your jack it up slightly, slide the old ones out, slide the new ones in, and bolt them down. Last thing to do, torque down the bottom nuts for the motor mounts to 15 foot-pounds and the top nuts to 15 foot-pounds. Then we can put the car on the ground and take it for a test drive. Alright, we finally finished up the install. Definitely hit a few snags, setbacks, etc. But like always, we fight through it, we learn a few things, and the next time it'll be significantly easier. So I guess the only thing that's left to do is to take it out on its first test drive, and I'll give you my initial impressions. Overall, it's definitely more vibration than the shot stock mounts, but on the flip side, the engine definitely feels more responsive, and as you can see in the GoPro videos, you can visibly see the engine is basically locked straight into the chassis. Overall, these 80A mounts I think are a pretty good upgrade if you aren't looking for a super comfortable daily driver but are looking to extract as much performance as possible out of your E36 while still maintaining some amount of streetability.
We're gonna go ahead and check this off of our list. And now we get to move on to the next things on our list, which are fixing the shifter assembly so our entire driveline works properly. And then we're gonna shift into actually getting this thing as clean as it can be.
Don't forget to like and hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the future stuff that's going on this build. Catch me on TikTok and Instagram at Chris Games, and until then, I'll catch you guys next time.